The NBA trade deadline is coming up on Thursday, February 8th, and teams all around the league are looking to make their final major tweaks to their roster for the season. Contenders are looking to round out their rotation, middle of the pack teams are looking to shake things up, and tanking teams are looking to sell their assets for youth and draft picks. And this season, the Wolves are definitively contenders. So what kind of action can we expect from the Timberwolves for this trade deadline? Well, that's what I'm going to outline in this Timberwolves trade deadline breakdown. The Wolves are contenders. After a brief spell as the West's number 2 team, the Wolves are back as the number 1 team in the West, as they have been for much of the season. The Wolves are looking to make a deep run in this season's playoffs, and we're already one of the league's better teams. So, the Wolves' mentality for this trade deadline should be improving around the edges. Trading away a core piece of this team could destabilize the rhythm that we're in. So, it's going to be a work around the edges type of deadline. The Wolves are a very good team, if you haven't noticed, but they are not perfect. There are some glaring flaws, and we'll cover what the Wolves should be looking to add a little later in the video. But what I want to establish, most importantly, is that the Wolves should not be content as we are. If we don't resolve some of the existing issues with the roster, it could cost us in the playoffs. So, in order to truly gauge what kind of expectations the Wolves should have for the deadline, you have to establish who's on the table. The NBA is a business, so sometimes this part of the conversation can seem pretty ruthless, but it's part of the process. So let's take a look at the Wolves' assets. Like I said before, trading a core piece of this team could destabilize the existing success that the Wolves have. So any core players are untouchable. By my estimates, that group is, of course, Anthony Edwards, then Karl Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, Jaden McDaniels, Mike Conley, and Naz Reid. Now, Mike Conley's expiring contract could be of some concern after the season, but for what he brings to the team, we absolutely cannot part ways with Minnesota Mike right now. The last player I take off the board is Nickeil Alexander-Walker. He's a very valuable 3-and-D player. He's on a very team-friendly contract. His contract goes through next season at a very nice $4.3 million deal. This is an entirely unsubstantiated claim, but Nah has to be one of, if not the best, under $5 million players in the league. I didn't do any research. I don't know who else in the league is getting paid $4.3 million, but there's just no way that trading him for an equivalent contract is going to be an upgrade. So for the remaining players on the board, in order of contract size, that leaves us with Kyle Anderson on an expiring $9 million deal, Shake Milton on a 2-year, $5 million deal, Troy Brown Jr., 2 years, $4 million. Wendell Moore has 2 years left plus a team option on the end for the $2.4 million. Jordan McLaughlin on expiring $2.3 million. Leonard Miller, who's got 2 years left plus 2 years of team options at $1.8 million. And Josh Why Not My Not, who has 2 years plus another team option on the end of that at $1.7 million. We also have two-way contracts for Luka Garza, Daishen Nix, and the injured Jalen Clark. Kyle Anderson is easily our most intriguing contract to trade. Anderson is a valuable, important part of this team, so trading him away does come with some risk of destabilizing the current chemistry. With that said, Kyle Anderson is also a subject of some valid criticism. His strange role with the Wolves as a de facto backup point guard / ball handler guy is hit or miss. Kyle Anderson's very capable of having a positive impact game to game, but sometimes he does make you scratch your head. Now, Anderson's contract is expiring. So, with that, he's appealing for a number of different trade situations. For contenders, he's a rental, and for tanking teams, he's not a long-term commitment. His contract size also makes him a critical piece for a lot of theoretical trades. When you're trying to move pieces around the edges, $9 million is a good number. It's not so big that it's tough to squeeze in, and it's not so small that you can't add it up to very much. So that'll match a lot of the salaries for players in the range we're looking for. Now, Wolves faithful all across the fandom would probably tell you we'd be willing to trade Shake Milton for a bag of stale pretzels right now. His trade value is super low. He's struggled since becoming a Wolf, and any trade scenario with him would probably feature him mostly as salary filler. $5 million is another good number in terms of making contracts match, but it's hard to imagine another team trying to buy in on the Shake Milton experience right now. Hopefully, if he remains with us or ends up with another team, he's able to reestablish that rhythm he had in Philadelphia. Right now, mostly salary filler. Troy Brown Jr. has been good, but Coach Finch hasn't been working him into the rotation for a while now, which is a point of contention amongst Wolves fans. TBJ is a legitimate rotation caliber player that could factor into the rotation of another team. Many Wolves fans believe he should factor into our rotation. At 24 in year 6, he's not going to be considered a young asset or an upside guy at this point, but I do think he could factor into a trade as a legitimate rotation player. McLaughlin is in a somewhat similar situation to TBJ, where he's basically out of the rotation. He's too old to be a youth trade asset. I like McLaughlin, but he's really more of a salary filler as far as his place in these trades would go. Everyone else is fairly untested. There is some youth in the group. It's hard to imagine any of these guys move the needle as far as a trade goes. A team in the rebuilding process looking to add youth could take some bites at the apple with some of these guys. In terms of draft assets, the war chest is completely depleted. We only have second rounders available for trade. Nothing that really moves the needle, but collectively they could be valuable to a rebuilding team. What do the Wolves need? The Wolves' most pressing issue comes in the form of turnover. It has been a persistent issue throughout the season and should be a major focus at the trade deadline. A source of a lot of these issues is our backup point guard situation. Mike Conley does great low turnover work as our starting point guard, but when he's off the court, we struggle. Minnesota Mike missed a couple games recently, and it was especially evident. Without Conley or Ant on the floor, ball handling and playmaking is generally handled by either Kyle Anderson or Nickeil Alexander-Walker. During Mike Conley's recent absences, Nickeil Alexander-Walker's been the guy stepping into the starting lineup, and I'm a huge fan of Na, but that's just not what he does. He's not a point guard, and he does get caught making some reckless, costly decisions with the ball in his hand. I really like Na as a secondary ball handler and as a utility scorer, but he struggles as the primary ball handler. Kyle Anderson is the other guy taking ball handling duties in Conley's absence, and it is hit or miss. He's generally a low ego player. He keeps the ball moving, but when he does his weird arms up driving into the lane thing, it gets pretty ugly, and I like Kyle Anderson in his role as a secondary ball handler or as a wing defender, but when Kyle Anderson is our backup point guard, it's suspect. Our big man rotation is obviously stacked. The unicorn lineup, Cat, Rudy, Nas, it is beyond solid. We don't need to look to pad the rotation there. Our wing rotation, also solid. Ant, Jaden, Na, Kyle. It's important to consider that we would need to fill Anderson's role if we did move him. Troy Brown Jr. could certainly fill in some of those duties, but we do need to keep that in mind as we discuss theoretical trades that would see Slow-Mo playing for another team. All right, so let's get to the fun part. Let's name names. Trade targets. Here are 4 potential trade targets in order of best fit. First, we got Tyus Jones. I made a whole video discussing this one, but I'll cover it again briefly here. As I believe Tyus Jones is hands down the best option for the Wolves. He's exactly what we're looking to add. The only question is if we can afford him. He's on an expiring $14 million deal. The Wizards are in a tough spot, and by that I mean they're awful. I think they should be in an absolute explosion mode right now because they're not even close to being a good team, and they don't exactly have a burgeoning star to make the leap forward with. So the question is, what is the going price of a high-level backup point guard? If the Wizards can turn Tyus into a first-round pick, that's ideal for them, and it's a price that the Wolves simply won't be able to match. So if a handful of second-rounders is enough to fetch Tyus, plus, a Kyle Anderson and a Troy Brown Jr. or some combination like that. It'd be great. It doesn't seem like enough to me, but if Tim Connolly can make it work, it would be a great fit. Next, we got Monte Morris. Morris missed the majority of this season so far with back and quad strains, but he recently made his season debut in late January. He spent the first 5 seasons of his career in Denver, where he worked his way into a consistent role as their backup point guard. He's a competent playmaker and scorer. During his time in Denver, he averaged just over 10 points a game with about 4 assists and only 1 turnover a game. He can also shoot the 3. He's roughly a 39% three-point shooter in his career. I think Morris is actually a really good fit as well, and he's a little more affordable. The Pistons are a special type of terrible right now. Not only are they not winning, but they're not winning at an embarrassing rate. Detroit's in a tough spot because they are going to want to move off veteran deals to focus on developing their youth. They can't continue to lose at this rate and expect Cade Cunningham to stay happy. A Kyle Anderson for Monte Morris trade does work 1-for-1 as far as the mechanics of the trade go. Kyle Anderson's fit in Detroit might seem a little weird, but factor in the effect he's had on young teams, and I think it makes a little bit of sense. Anderson has been a leader on the Wolves, and since his arrival, the Wolves have ascended to being one of the best teams in the league. And he was part of a similar cycle in Memphis before he was in Minnesota. He was a veteran presence on a young team that ascended to being one of the best in their conference. Now, the Pistons are in a much more dire place than the Grizzlies or the Wolves were when Anderson joined those teams, but Anderson has proven he has touch as a veteran presence. Maybe a second rounder or two would make the Pistons look for that swap. But it's kind of a weird position where Kyle Anderson might be the better player in that trade, and I'm still not confident. It's kind of fit dependent. Morris is on an expiring deal that's roughly the same size as Anderson, so there's no commitment. I think there is legs under this deal, but it all comes down to if the Pistons think the Anderson fit is good, or if the Wolves think losing Anderson for Morris would be worth it, or if it would be destabilizing. We're going back to the Wizards for DeLon Wright. He's another veteran point guard on an expiring contract. He would be an interesting fit for the Wolves. He's a plus player and a very good defender. He doesn't fit the profile for what we need as well as Tyus, but he could make sense. He's not the same caliber of offensive player as Tyus or Monte Morris, but he's a defensive improvement from both. What makes Wright potentially a better fit is that we could get the deal without involving slow-mo. Shake or TBJ plus some of the Timber pups or second rounders is a fair price for Wright in my opinion. If anything, it would be an overpay. So say Shake Milton, Wendell Moore, and maybe a second round pick or two. There could be legs there again. DeLon Wright might hit the buyout market as well, which is something I'll discuss in a little bit. Last would be Bones Highland. I don't like the fit of Highland very much, but he is a guard who's definitely on the trade block, and he's the cheapest of these 4 options. He's only on a $2 million deal for this year and then $4 million next year. If the Clippers are looking to add a wing to their rotation, Troy Brown Jr. for Bones could be the foundation for a trade, but it doesn't work 1-for-1. Highland's a bit of a gunslinger. He's a bit of a chucker, so I'm not confident he solves our turnover or stability issue. But he is capable of scoring explosion at times. Again, don't think he's a great fit, but potentially one to consider. So what's the wrap-up here? That didn't sound like a super confident rundown of trade targets. Well, the wrap-up is that the Wolves' buying power is low. We don't have tremendous trade assets laying around, and getting rid of slow-mo could be a risky move if we did find a suitor. I wouldn't be surprised if the Wolves didn't make a trade deadline move at all, but seeing some of our issues go unaddressed could be worrisome. One potential resolution is the buyout market. The buyout market is volatile. You never know which players will end up on it and where those players will choose to go. Kyle Lowry is a spicy name that might end up on the buyout market as an option. Patty Mills could potentially be a good fit. He hasn't really played very much in the last 2 years, so it's hard to determine how much tread's left on the tire. Like I mentioned before, DeLon Wright is a potential fit that could end up on the buyout market. Maybe an Alec Burks. It's really hard to tell. You never know with the buyout market. In my opinion, the Wolves need to make some tweaks to elevate our team, but without much spending power, it could prove difficult. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Wolves unable to make a deal at the trade deadline, but Tim Connolly has proven He's got an ability to engineer trades. So let's hope he can make another tweak to contribute even more to what might already be the best Wolves season of all time. Stay lit, and thanks for watching.